Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. All about nutrition from your favorite dietitian. Everything you need to digest in your mind. Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. Making you healthier one bite at a time. With Tony. Woo.
Hello and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. I know I say this like every single time I record a podcast, particularly when somebody else is on the call, but I really am most excited for this episode because this is like the first time in a long time. I actually remember doing this once before, maybe 3 years ago, where I had somebody who, listened to the podcast multiple times, like was a big fan of the podcast. And you guys may have remembered the episode many years ago. And this person had come on and we talked about, his relationship with food, and we kind of gave him like a little counseling session publicly. And it went over really well. So all that to say, today's episode, I have a fan of the Tips with Tony podcast. Lucy is here virtually. I'm going to have her introduce herself in a second, but she had reached out on Instagram and she shared some of her concerns, some of the things she's struggling with. She had some questions and I was able to provide a little bit of insight, but I was like, you know what? I have a better idea. Let's hop on a call. Let's do this live because your questions, what she's asking, what she's currently struggling with, so many people are struggling with. So I want you guys to understand, find yourself in the story, find yourself in something that I said. If that resonates with you, utilize that in your life and know that you're not alone. And I hope that this episode helps you get some clarity and some healing. So with that said, Lucy, quick intro. I would love for you to just say hi, let people know a little bit about you, and then we're going to go and I'm going to read your question out loud. And we'll go into it.
Well, thank you, Tony. Yeah, I'm Lucy. I'm a makeup artist. I'm 40 years old now and I live in London. And I've had your jingle of your podcast in my head all day. I to do this.
I'm curious, when did you start listening to the podcast?
What's that, sorry?
I'm curious, when did you start listening to the podcast?
Maybe it's been some time in the last year, I would say. I remember when I first started my recovery, there was a bunch of podcasts then that I followed and then never really thought about the fact that since then there was loads of new voices that I could follow. So every now and then, especially if I was having like a struggle on a particular thing, I would search that in the podcast and then you came up from there. So you've been a regular since then.
I love it. Well, thank you for listening.
Yeah,
make it my purpose, like here, like I have a reason. So thank you for letting me know.
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely.
So this is great. Okay. All right. So I'm going to read your message and it's long, but I love that it's long. It's detailed. And so for those of you listening, listen with open ears and an open heart because there's a lot here and I want to make sure that we cover it. Okay. All right. Hi, Tony. Apologies for the embarrassingly long message. Not embarrassing at all. That's me. I absolutely understand if you don't have time to read it or respond. I've followed your podcast for a long time now, and you've been an important and helpful voice in my recovery from over 20 years of bulimia and chronic dieting. But I seem to have found myself in a position that no one in the anti-diet recovery field ever talks about. After first falling into my ED at 12, I began my recovery at 35 and I am now 40. I haven't binged or purged now in years. In the majority of ways, I feel healed, but I am still getting bigger consistently and steadily after 5 years. I don't weigh myself, but my clothes are beginning to get tight again. The last time I had a wobble and weighed myself was about 6 months ago. I've gained around 56 pounds in recovery and was not, quote unquote, underweight to begin with. I began at a UK size 12 to 14, am now an 18 and I'm about to go into a 20. I say this just for context, as it's not so much the size that matters to me as the fact that it is increasingly still and never seems to plateau at a set point. This latest increase in size has been hugely triggering for all of my old ED thoughts. I work to undo my fat phobia constantly, but I cannot come to terms with the idea of just gaining and gaining forever. Every book, podcast, etc. I listen to talks about the importance of restoring weight and how your recovered set point may be high. I'm okay with that, but no one seems to talk about it continuing to increase steadily after 5 years. I'm currently in a position where I can't afford therapy. I don't binge, and I would say I eat intuitively, but I do enjoy large portions of food, and I know I eat more than I likely expend most days energy-wise, as while I exercise a few times a week, I don't have an active lifestyle. Sadly, 25 years of counting calories gives you an intrinsic knowledge of that kind of thing, although I also appreciate it's not simple as calories in, calories out. I had just hoped this would feel somewhat effortless by now, and that I would have reached a homeostasis at some point so I could find peace, as all the literature and studies promise. I feel that if my only choices now are to gain indefinitely or go back to dieting and disordered eating, I may as well give in and choose the later. I appreciate it's likely a triggering subject for some listeners, but would you feel there is any way you may be able to speak to this on a future episode? I'm so sorry I don't have the funds to pay for your services, and I entirely understand if you don't have the time or capacity to help. I appreciate your work and want to give you my sincere thanks for everything you've helped me with so far. Lucy.
It is long, isn't it?
It's great. How does it sound for you hearing that back?
Do you know what? It sounds like we're about to make the podcast episode I wish someone had made. Like when I hear that, I'm just like, this is the stuff no one ever talks about. Like
goosebumps. My face has goosebumps.
And it's the part of, recovery. Like I say, I'm 5 years in and I've been doing this daily. It's every day. I even if it's just my thought processes, whatever, but it's something I'm always working on because I know I'm not at that point where it's effortless or whatever yet. And like, I feel like all of the recovery stuff out there, like I said in that message, it's very much early recovery. It's learning how to intuitively eat. It's undoing the diet mindset. It's a lot of things which are incredibly helpful, important, vital work. But then they talk about, reaching your set point weight once you figure out how to intuitively eat. And I was like, well, I've figured that out, I think, as best I can with all of the information that's out there. Mm-hmm. And yet I'm in this position where the set point weight actually is not a thing that's happening or doesn't appear to be happening. Mm-hmm. But there's no information out there for that. And I don't know whether that story doesn't get told in the anti-diet recovery eating disorder world because those people are this like success stories. So when you see, people who are doing podcasts or putting books out or whatever, talking about their own recovery, they are more often than not in straight size bodies, which I am as well. I mean, I'm not, I'm like I said, I said to you what size I am, but I'm only just, there's a lot of UK shops I can't buy clothes and stuff. And the bigger I get, the more of a problem that will be. And yeah, I just feel like people don't talk about it because maybe they need to, it's a life raft for people in recovery, this idea of the set point weight. And so it's kind of like what keeps you going. You think eventually that will happen. Right. And it's not like in my head, I thought, that my set point weight is going to be the body of a thin person. I don't naturally think that's my body, but I thought it would settle so that then I could get used to it. And you can't ever accept your new body when it's always changing. So that's where I am, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I want to break that down a little bit. So I definitely need to speak to the part where you said it's not talked about a lot in the anti-diet community. And I think it's because, and although I don't speak to that, I don't lie about this, but I think where it's so hard to speak to is because it's like the fear of gaining weight is what's causing the eating disorder patterns and behaviors, right?
Exactly.
So if you basically say like, you're going to gain weight, and it might not be a body that you've ever pictured yourself in or a size you've ever felt comfortable in, like you might, if you're still tying your weight to your worth, if you're still tying to this idea that like, it's not okay to be in a bigger body, well, then you're not going to want to heal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's what I meant by not wanting to trigger people. I've been very conscious of that because I know that this story would have triggered me in my earlier days.
Yeah.
And in my earlier days, I was very active in a lot of like forums on Facebook for this kind of thing. And I think if I had seen somebody say, I've been doing this for 5 years and I'm still gaining weight, I would have just been like, I'm not doing it. But I think the thing is, the truth of my situation is not necessarily like the fear that people need to have, because I don't believe that I am truly eating intuitively. I think I'm very advanced in it, but I'm not there yet.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was going to, because then you later had, I had responded to your message.
Yes.
And then you said, I'm going to read what else you said, because this is what I had suspected, but I wasn't sure. So I did want to kind of like go into it a little deeper. So I've been doing more reading and thinking on the subject since sending this. And I came to realize that my quote unquote overeating in large portions are not only a reaction to past restriction, but also a fear of restriction now. As in, if I'm faced with the large or regular size of something, I will always get the large, because I feel a fear in my body of if I choose the small or make a small portion of food, I'll feel like I'm restricting my food again, and that will lead to binging. Almost like once I realized that restriction was the cause of my years of bulimia, I became afraid of ever having less food when I have the option of more. I don't know if that fleshes out part of what I wrote, but feel free to read it however you see fit. I also feel I eat for comfort as a result of issues in my childhood, being raised by a narcissistic mother, and food was an easy source of comfort for me then. And I think has just continued to be that as I've grown up, that I get a lot more from food emotionally than I realized. I thought emotional eating was just, quote, feel sad, eat cake, end quote. But I think mine is a lot more subconscious and underlying than that. All that said, that may be a subject for another time. No, it's a subject for now.
Yay.
It's a subject for now. So I never want to make assumptions, right? Because we never know, right, until you speak to the person, right? And everyone really is different. But the healing process is not linear, and there's many sides, right? So it sounds like you've done great work in healing those parts of you that would have triggered binging or purging. And that is tremendous. Like, that is something that you need to recognize is so powerful and so healthy, right? We live in, I know you know this, but I just want to reiterate this to the listeners, that we live in a society that perpetuates this idea that what you look like equals health, but it doesn't, right? We know that your behaviors, your relationship with food, your mental health, all those things is what actually equals your health. So with the absence of binging and purging, that is healthy, right? So you've done the work to get there. Now, the later thing of what you just said is very common. It's this, because you don't want to go backwards when it comes to, binging or purging. We know, right? I talk about it all the time. Like, restriction leads to overeating, undereating. I just put a post about it yesterday. Like, undereating leads to overeating, restriction leads to binging, all that stuff. So logically your brain's like, well, I don't want to be hungry.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just physical hunger, because I don't allow myself to get physically hungry now. My eating disorder was, 23 years of bulimia, essentially, but with periods of anorexia, periods of binge eating, periods of chronic dieting. So it's a bit of everything. But yeah, restriction was a huge part of it. And so now I would never physically restrict my food. I wouldn't go hungry and want to stay there. And I also understand now that satiety is not just about volume, but it's about nutrients. So,
texture, flavor.
Yeah, exactly. And so all of that, but it also is a mental thing, restriction. And so, as you know, so I know I'm not restricting myself physically, but it's that mental, the idea of there's a large and there's a medium and a small, and I'm going to have the large because this is a thing that I want to eat that I know is delicious and I'm excited to eat it for whatever reason, that may be connected to the way I feel about food. And if I don't get as much of it as I can, I will feel like I've lost out on food. I will feel like I've restricted myself to having less of it.
Right.
And then later on, will that subconsciously, this evening, will I feel something about that? Is it going to be some feeling of sadness or, just anything? I just don't want to awaken anything of that because it was so damaging to me for such a long time. So you see so many people who are afraid to eat more. I'm now afraid to eat less.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I never hear people talk about that.
But it actually is very true. And that's where sometimes, people might describe it as like anxious eating, kind of like the fear of, well, I might not be able to eat later, so I better eat now, regardless if I'm hungry or not. Right. Like the way you're describing it, it's a little bit more in the extreme per se, like, because it's, in response to, an old pattern that didn't serve you.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Before I give you any sort of like advice, I would be curious to know a little bit more about, you said that your eating disorder started at 12.
Yes.
Just for context, I think it would be helpful if you don't mind, because everyone's story is unique.
Yeah.
Where you came from is different. So I would love you to kind of share a little bit more about why you feel like it started, when it developed, all that stuff. And then later, I would love to talk about, like, you mentioned your recovery process. Like, did you work with a dietitian? Did you work with a therapist? Was it more on your own? That sort of thing. So let's go all the way back, and then we can like kind of speed people up, and then we can talk about some actions that you could take today.
Okay. When I say it started at 12 was the first time I made myself sick. I started restricting my food somewhat before that, probably in about the year probably in the year before that, I think. I started restricting it because at 11, I'd already hit puberty between like 10 and 11, and I'm very tall and I have big boobs, big hips. I'm a curvy person. And I think at 11, I was a little conscious of my body, of it changing and so on. But we went on holiday, a family holiday, and we got our photos back. And there was a photo of me in the sea. And I was in a bikini and I had fat on my stomach that I'd never had before as a child. And that is just, it took me 35 years or whatever into my recovery to realize that, that's just your body type. Like, that is where you store fat. Doesn't matter what you do, that's where that's going to be. But when I saw that picture, I didn't think anything like that. I thought, that shouldn't be there and I need to get rid of it. And I also went to a school that was quite a competitive kind of girls' school. We used to have this fashion show every year that all the most beautiful girls would go into, which is the most toxic thing. And I hope they don't still do it. Wait,
but they would like vote people in or something?
They would like, pretty much. Yeah. Like the most popular girls in the like high school would pick the other popular, and then they'd do this big fashion show for charity. And obviously you had to be like thin and beautiful, but like the most popular girls were always thin and beautiful. And I was, in my eyes, not thin enough, but also I had like acne and a bit of an underbite. And I just was always like, if I can't be beautiful, at least I can be thin. And so I'd started to just restrict my food. And my mum noticed, mostly when we were on holiday. This next year we'd gone on holiday again, and the family would go out for meals at night and I wouldn't go. I would refuse and we would have these arguments and stuff. So she started making me go. And that was when I was like, well, I need to get this food out of myself. So I started to be sick. And then it just became, well, that was easy. That was an answer to the eating that food. And that's where the cycle began, really. And then it just, it took me years of even doing that, of purging and so on, to even accept that I was bulimic. When it's happening to you, you kind of just normalize it. And yeah, that just went on steadily. It wasn't all the time because I knew it was bad and I knew I didn't want to do it. So I would try not to, but my attempts to not do that were me just being on diets and restricting my food hugely and over exercising and stuff, which always led back to it. Right. And yeah, I was 35 when I finally was just like, I just can't do this anymore. Just mostly because it wasn't even, I don't want to be on diets anymore, this and that. It was just the purging I was doing that, what people call flushing, where you drink loads of water and you keep going. And I was just unwell. Like I would have, I was very shaky. I was having hot and cold sweats. And I was just like, this could genuinely kill me if I don't stop doing this. So I just decided to throw myself into it more than I ever had before. I think I got to the point where I was just like, I'm just ready to like give up on this, like, and just hand myself over to whatever is on the other side. Can I say on the way there as well, there was numerous times when I did try to go to doctors and the NHS, which we have here, which is amazing, but it's very much, your weight is not low enough for us to be able to do anything for you. Like I was never fortunate. I was always in the verging on the overweight BMI, which obviously we know is rubbish, but which exacerbates it further. You think, well, I tried to get help. I'm deemed not worthy of it. I'm clearly not thin enough anyway. Maybe I don't have a problem. Blah, blah,
right.
Blah.
It diminishes the fact that you have a problem. It makes you feel like it's not that bad.
Yeah.
It's really terrible. We
really but yeah, so that was 5 years ago. And luckily I've managed to stick at it. I've had a few wobbles, obviously, but I've kept going in the right direction.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I think, it's definitely not talked about enough. I think a lot of people, because, binge eating disorder is the most common eating disorder in America, at least. And I'm sure it probably is in the UK as well.
Yeah.
But purging is not necessary. And a lot of people associate binging and purging together. They think they need to be together, and they're actually not always the case. It's not always the case. But all that to say, like, I know, and because I've spoken with people in the DMs before, and I appreciate those people kind of coming forward where, they're purging with other, not necessarily self-induced vomiting, but it might be with, laxatives or over-exercise. And unfortunately, not for nothing, like those two methods are considered like more normal in society, right? Yeah. It's like almost like if you don't feel good, okay, like take something pill to clear it out. And that's not healthy at all.
No, I probably would have considered that. I remember taking laxatives with my friend when we were probably about 11 or something. But then I never understood the laxative as a purging thing anyway. But the exercise thing, I just found it easier. I know some people, maybe they try
because it's glorified in society, especially if you are in a bigger body.
Oh, yeah.
I got praise for the amount of exercise that I did, literally praised. However, if I were in a smaller body, I would have been told, calm down, slow down. Why are you working out so hard? Why are you working out so hard?
Yeah.
Right.
I did work out a lot as well. But I think the purging, because I wasn't somebody who would, throw up everything I ate. It was very specific, the urge would build and build and build until it was just impossible to not. And then I would go and I would spend, for whatever would be like $50 or something on food and just, and it would be like a process. But yeah, and I was I was embarrassed about it to a degree, but sometimes I would try and bring it up with people in conversation, but as though it was something I used to do, like that I didn't still do. But then eventually, I had to just admit that and I'm not ashamed of it, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. I'm also sober, and I talk about that quite openly as well. I think it's a huge part of recovering from anything, is to not be ashamed. But yes, there was a long time when I was very ashamed of it and didn't speak about it.
And how did that serve you? Probably didn't, right?
Didn't serve me.
I think it's important for people to hear that, right? Like,
oh God, no.
Shame will keep you stuck, and it won't help you make any sort of progress.
Yeah.
And I think maybe deep down people know that, and they're not ready to change yet. And
yeah, I think there's a thing of shame as well with like, I remember having a conversation with my mother about it, and her saying, the kind of famous words of like, well, you were never that bad, Lucy. I mean, you weren't like those anorexics who were skin and bone, and you just think, those aren't the only people that need help. I understand that, but it's like a spectrum, and you can be anywhere on this spectrum and still be very in need of help, and in a very dangerous place. And I think there was a lot of that as well, of just sort of feeling like you couldn't really say that you had these issues because, well, you go for healthcare, no one believes you, they don't help you. You say it to your mum, she says, oh, you're not that bad, and other people would think the same. So you just end up in a bit of a dead end, really. And I think actually me getting to a point where I could recover at 35 was because of the climate around this stuff now. It was the same when I stopped drinking. There is a lot more awareness now of how, toxic diet culture is, and just there's a lot of voices out there that I could go to now, like yourself, who probably 10 years ago wouldn't have existed. So yeah, I did have some therapy here and there. But the vast majority of what I did in my recovery came from reading books, listening to podcasts, just getting that advice, even in the early days, things like getting rid of your scales, getting rid of your apps, all of these things, like just hearing what you need to try and do. And then being in forums online, and just, that support of other people. But the visibility of other people who are in recovery is like been huge for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here to share, because that is exactly, you're providing, like you said, the podcast that you needed. Now you're creating it, and that means other people need it, and they're going to hear this, and they're going to get a lot of help from it. So thank you. This is really brave of you, and really powerful stuff. Okay, so this is my observation. Are you ready to hear it?
I am. I'm ready.
So, which is what you're dealing with right now is very normal. You have healed your eating disorder. You have not healed your disordered eating.
Okay, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Disorder, you have not healed your disordered eating. So there's progress there. There's power there.
I could cry. Yes, of course.
It's the beautiful thing that you've done so far.
Sometimes you just need to hear somebody else say the thing back to you for you to believe it,
Yeah. And you mentioned it a few times, like, it's not about the weight at all. It's really not. It's not about the weight. So I don't want to dismiss the fact that it's probably it's bothering you, and it probably triggers you, and it's like frustrating. But to me, it's just a symbol that there's more healing to be done. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's time to still heal because, and not necessarily, but usually with a health, this is hard. I don't want to, it's not always the case, but I think something that will show you're making progress, potentially, I have to be really careful with my words because everyone's behaviors are different, but
sure.
I think for you, I think once you start plateauing, because of the knowledge and education you have behind you, and because of the awareness you have, and once you start going into actively healing the disordered eating, my guess is your weight will plateau, and you will at least it will be consistent and steady. And that technically is the goal, but really that's a symbol of the other stuff, right? That's just probably going to happen once and that's the other thing too. And I'm glad you mentioned it before when you said, like, you think you're intuitively eating, you're almost intuitive eating, and then you realize maybe you're not, because true intuitive eating is honoring your hunger and fullness cues. And if you're overeating because you're afraid of then binging, that's not honoring your hunger and fullness cues.
It's true. Yes. Of course. Yes.
Right. It's honoring one side of the side that you're knowing you don't want to restrict because that'll lead to it, but it's not genuinely eating for your like wants and needs. It's eating based on a fear.
Yes.
And eating based on fear is not food freedom.
Oh my God.
Where we have freedom, we have no fear.
Yes. Yes. I mean, that all makes huge sense. I think it's been very easy for me to just enmesh disordered eating and my eating disorder as just one thing.
Right.
Thinking one would not be healed and the other, like, to not separate them in that way, which actually is, yes, it's very helpful. And I think, when I'm eating, food still plays more of a part in my thought process throughout the day than I would like it to. Right. I get more pleasure out of it than I would like. Mm-hmm. I know, but it's, we all know it's confusing because food is pleasurable. Sometimes you will overeat, like, Christmas dinner, whatever. Like, so finding that balance on a daily basis. And I don't work a regular job. I'm different place, different hours every day, which really, really puts it to the test.
Yeah.
I mean, that example of, me always getting the large portion of something because I'm afraid to get the small, that definitely also goes for, when I'm making food at home for myself. Mm-hmm. I will always have the biggest bowl of cereal that I can have. And my thinking was, well, I'm following my intuition because I wouldn't eat until I was hungry. I would always wait to be hungry before I ate. So I'm quite good at that.
Okay.
But then when I would eat a lot. And then I would say to myself, well, that's fine because you'll kind of, you work through that food before you're hungry again. Mm-hmm. But that, I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe that just didn't seem to happen. Maybe I wasn't eating enough more for it to make a huge difference. If I went out for a massive lunch, I probably wouldn't be eating for the rest of the day. But if I just had 2 extra slices of bread on the side, probably wouldn't make that much difference. But that's the kind of thing that I was always doing, which is definitely a hangover from my eating disorder of the chronic dieting part of it, of where I would have my food in the morning, my breakfast in the morning, and then I would go to work and I'd meet people at work who hadn't eaten breakfast yet. And I never understood that because I was like, I wake up, it's the first thing I think about. Yeah. But then I'd be on the second breakfast and I knew that there would be all this catering at work. There's always croissants and granolas and stuff. And so I was like, I couldn't resist food back then. I was, it was too intoxicating for me. So I would bring a big pot of soya yogurt, which was 0 points on Weight Watchers at the time. And I'd put stevia in it, so 0 calories. And then I'd fill it with fruit. And I would just shovel that in. This pot was massive. It was, half the size of my head. But that is the thing I was always doing. It was because there was no nutrients in there. It was fat-free, sugar-free. There's nothing in there. Yeah. So the volume was there, but I was never satiated. Mm-hmm. It was always about how much volume can I get in? How much food can I get in? Because I need to stave off this hunger. Big mountains of roasted vegetables, that would be my dinner. Right. So this whole thing of just big portions, needing food has just always been a thing. And then, you know, I talked to you about like how I think maybe that began in my childhood, which again is probably for another time. But the thing of comfort eating, which I didn't understand, which I now think is probably something I do just generally in life. I've learned utterly subconsciously that food is just a way to immediately feel comforted. Even if there's no great pain that I'm going through, even if I'm just sitting at home alone on my sofa and nothing's really going on. But if I go and I get something to eat, then I just feel like held or whatever, you know, just like it's just a feeling. And I think maybe I just thought everybody was like that. But then looking back, I think maybe there is, you know, a reason that I turned to that so easily. I was saying when I was like a kid, we would get, I don't know what you call it there, but we call it a selection box at Christmas, which is all like candy bars and chocolate bars, like a bunch of them. And, or like on Easter, we would do like an Easter egg hunt. We'd get like 8 Easter eggs, big chocolate eggs. And my cousins and everyone, when we were like 7, 6, would make them last a week. And I would eat all of mine in a day, one after the other. And, you know, and when I was thinking back on like, how did my eating disorder begin? I always believe like an eating disorder begins with a diet, usually. Like that is usually the trigger, some sort of restriction. So I was like, well, that's what started my eating disorder. So, but what was going on when I was younger? I was still the person who had to eat all the food. And I think I was conscious enough of that to go on that diet the first time when I was 11. And so, yeah, just thinking about that. I mean, just the last couple of days since I sent you that message, because after sending it, I was reading a lot online because I'm very like that. I deep dive on stuff and to try and find something to help myself. And just reading about that and like sort of the trauma of emotionally kind of absent parents and so on. It just hit a nerve with me when I was reading about it. It felt very familiar. So I've just been trying, and I know you can't really heal trauma in the body by like thinking your way out of it. Right. But I have been thinking anyway. Just when I get food, I wait until I'm hungry, which I've always done. I will make a smaller portion of it in the knowledge that I can have more, which was always something I knew, but for some reason before that seemed impossible to do because I thought I was restricting by doing it. I'll make a smaller portion. And if I feel afterwards, if I'm no longer hungry, but I have that like mouth craving for food.
Sorry, my cat just jumped up.
I am a cat woman without a cat. And so I love your cat. Beautiful. If I feel that in the past, it was just, to me, that was immediately like, you're supposed to be able to eat what you want now, Lucy. Don't restrict yourself. You want to eat that chocolate bar out the fridge or that ice cream, go and get it. Like, it's fine. And instead now I'm like, it is fine. But just, if that's what you want for your dessert, just wait till you're hungry. You'll probably be hungry in a couple of hours. But just saying to myself, food is not love. Food is not comfort. You are loved. You are safe. This is just an olfactory experience that is momentary. And just really trying to, just having that realization that I was using food in that way, which before I had been in denial of because I thought it was, I'm angry, so I'm going to go and get some food to calm myself down. Right. And it's not that for me. So that's been like a new realization. But yeah, whilst it's helpful, it's very much a thought process. Like my brain is still on very much doing that. But been all right for 2 days.
And that's the thing, when you're healing, you're still going to have to think about it a little bit. Like it's not going to just, until it becomes a habit, it's really, not going to be the thing that is just something you don't even have to think about. And then even within that, even with our habits, we still have to think, we need the cue, I got to brush my teeth, but you kind of just go and you brush your teeth in the morning, right? Like, so it's a habit, but you still think about it a little bit.
Yeah.
So don't beat yourself up about the fact that it's taking up a lot of your brain space right now. I think that the thing to look for, like things that we want to look for in your healing process is, the weight stabilizes. That's probably an indication that maybe there's some healing happening. You're not obsessing about it too much or thinking about it too much. That's some sort of, indication that the healing process is happening. And then also like feeling your feelings and allowing yourself to, maybe in that moment you don't feel safe. Maybe in that moment you feel lonely or abandoned or whatever feelings come up. Like feel the feelings and know what, like there's a saying that my grandfather used to say, like, this too shall pass. Like it's going to go by and it's not going to be that bad. Like you're going to get through it. And then I would say the second part to that is, now that you have the awareness that there might be some emotional eating happening, that it's time to explore other ways to cope with your emotions. So it could be as simple as letting the thought pass, but maybe trying some other practices, whether that be journaling or meditating, like you said, giving yourself like a little affirmation.
I mean, I think one of the funny things is I live a life full of a lot of self-care because I don't have any kids, not married, like I don't, I do what I want. And I am an introvert, so I like to stay home and read and light a candle and, do my yoga, whatever. So I'm not rushed around or, having to concentrate on other people's needs. And as a result, I am quite emotionally stable. And so I think sometimes when I think about this emotional eating thing, it's not even that I'm really feeling anything. I think I've just learned from such a young age that like food is love, like, and so regardless of anything, like who doesn't want that? And so I just think I almost have to like slightly grieve that in a way, like it's not, I have love in my life.
It's it's like looking at food a little bit more neutrally.
Yes.
Right. It can be it can be delicious. It can provide comfort. Like it can, but that's not always what it is, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like understanding that. And it's also not the only. Sorry, Chloe just whacked me in the face with her tail. She laughed. You just needed to like show her presence and then leave. But yeah, it's just, kind of understanding that. But I do think, so I think that's a part of it. I think that the part that is a little deeper that I want you to go explore a little bit more. It's not so much like food is love. It to me, there's still that component of, I need to eat more so that I don't end up binging, which then leads to purging.
Yes.
That is like the bigger thing that we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, I think there's the levels on top of each other, I feel like. But yes, certainly I feel like that is vital in just getting some stability. Because like you say, it's not about the weight. I don't weigh myself. Like I'm going off the way my clothes feel. And I know that I have to, undo my fat phobia and so on to not, the more you fear that, the more you will kind of try to fight it by going the other way. And I've done a lot to undo it, but I know I still have some intrinsic stuff left over. But it was just like, I think if I had been eating in a way that I felt was truly intuitive, just giving my body what it needed physically more than mentally, and my weight was continuing to do that, I'd probably be going to the doctor or something saying, I think I need to get some blood checks done or something like this. But because I know that I'm not there and I'm seeing that happen, I'm kind of like, it almost seems silly that I thought I would hit some sort of set point. But I think you just hope. You're like, maybe this is intuitive eating. Like it's certainly better, it's the best I've been.
Right.
Like, and it's still not enough. And I don't know what else to do now because I'm doing the best I can. So yeah, it's not that, I care about whether I lose weight or whatever. It's just that stability that I want now. So that, like like I say, if I stay the size I'm at now, which is bigger than I've ever been and would have ever thought I might be, I've done the work for that to be fine. Like, I think body neutrality has been way more important to me than body positivity. But yeah, like I say, it's hard to do that work fully for yourself when you're consistently changing. And so I just would like to get to a place where I feel like I have a bit of homeostasis and I can finally, do whatever I need to do on that side of things. And hopefully then something else won't come up. hopefully I'll be there.
I have a practice for you.
Okay.
Something I want you to do. Because I also want to challenge the idea that you can't love your body and accept your body now, even though it's changing. Because acceptance doesn't mean not changing. Acceptance means being okay with it in that moment.
Yes. So yes, I suppose it's a fear, still of just a fear of more change, and a fear of I guess I probably still just do I don't hold fat phobia towards other people, but I probably sold it towards myself, which is often maybe the case, which is like a self-objectifying thing, isn't it? Which is something I sort of try to not do as much as possible. But my main way that I try to do it is by ignoring my body, and I don't want that to be what I do. So, yeah, I just think coming from where I came from, in order for me to feel like I can do that work fully, for some reason, for me, it feels like I need to be able to look in the mirror with my body being the same way for like a good 6 months and me just drum into myself some body neutrality. But
that's not realistic.
No.
Because here's the thing, Lucy, like your body, even when you're stable, even when your body is stable, meaning like you wear the same size pants for the next 40 plus years in your life, even when your weight is stable, it's still going to look and feel different day to day.
I know that. So
some days you're going to be hydrated, some days you're going to, be like inflamed some day. Like there's so many things you're going to, depending on the clothes that you wear, depending on the mirror that you're looking in.
Yeah, I have. I used to have a very serious issue with body dysmorphia, to the point where there are photos of myself and videos that I used to take because I was always body checking, and in these photos and videos, to me at the time, I was grotesque and I was huge and I was, all of these things that at the time I thought were terrible. And if I look at those photos now, it is literally like they've been photoshopped. Like it's not just like, oh, it wasn't that bad. Like it's literally like I'm seeing a different thing and I can't understand what I used to see. And I even get that now sometimes if I'd make a video or something of myself doing something, not body checking now, but it might be hiking or dancing or whatever. And I look at it and I think, oh, that's, there you are, whatever. But I may not think positively of my body. I may see some things on it where I think, oh, that's, oh well. Which in itself is great. I mean, that's progress that I'm there as opposed to where I used to be. But even now, but what I find is that it's about how I feel about myself, like you say, in the moment. So if I'm looking at that in the moment, I will start to pick myself apart. But I went on like a road trip 3 months ago and I had a few moments like that. And then the other day I looked back at the photos and the videos and I was like, you look fine. You look absolutely normal and fine. Like, and so even, something as close as 3 months ago, it's something about in the moment. But yeah, so I guess it's a fear of it's me telling myself that body acceptance requires stability, isn't it? Which is what you just said. And it just took me ages to come around to.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's lovely to know as well. So I think, the thing about me getting bigger and bigger is more about the fact that I probably know that I'm not eating what I don't want to say should, but you know, what I should be eating in a day, like what I need. I'm not eating what I need in a day. I'm eating what some other part of me thinks it needs. You're eating
from a healing space, not a healed space.
Yes. Stop saying these great things. Just get that on a t-shirt. Yes.
And it's still great. It's not, you're just not done yet. That's all. And I know that might probably maybe feel a little overwhelming or frustrating, but the reality is we're never really done healing.
It's not overwhelming or frustrating though. It's a relief to hear someone say it, because the whole thing of when we were saying about doing this podcast is like, you never hear people having this conversation. No one writes about it. Like, I mean, I don't know, you know, I know talking about sizes and weights is triggering, and I don't know how you deal with that on the podcast, but sometimes for me, I feel like I just need somebody to just be real about it. Like, and there's so much, everyone's trying not to offend each other, and I get that, and I don't want to offend anyone or trigger anyone, but sometimes you just need to hear someone just be honest about the situation. And it's just because no one was talking about this stuff or writing about it, I just felt very alone in it. So I would maybe have had a thought like that, but it would have got thrown away immediately. Like, and just to hear somebody else objectively hear your story and reflect back to you things that are so clearly true, but that you just needed someone else to say them. So, you know, I know there's more work to do, but I'm not afraid of doing the work. I've been doing that for 5 years. Like, I just didn't know what work to do. And so it's very helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome. All right. Well, I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but this has been definitely great. I would love to have you back maybe in a few months or so, just to check on you, see how you're doing.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, I would love that. Fingers crossed I'll be doing well.
And also for like accountability, right? Like if you know you're going to come back in to speak, I don't think you realize how much help you just gave to so many people just by sharing everything. And this is definitely a conversation, and I appreciate you bringing my eyes to it, because I'm definitely going to, you know, this is where it begins, but I'm going to speak to this stuff more because it is important to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think those who are willing and ready to hear it will hear it and receive it. And those who aren't, they're not, but that's okay.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Right, thank you for being here. For those listening to the podcast, if you like the episode, make sure you send it and share it with a friend. If you have not subscribed yet, definitely subscribe. And that's it for me and from us today. Thank you so much for being here. As always, I'm Toni Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.